Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the last in our series of creative conversations this term. It's a real honour this evening to welcome the poet Ruth Padel and the artist Issam Kourbaj for a discussion which will migrate between art and poetry, focusing on Ruth and Issam's poetry and art installation, Dark Water, Burning World, which was made in response to refugees fleeing the Syrian war and arriving on the Greek island of Lesbos. Ruth has a lifelong relationship with Greece, and when she visited the refugee camp in Lesbos in 2016, she spoke to Issam and they resolved to do something together to honour both the refugees and the islanders, welcoming them. And back in Cambridge, Issam was already making boats out of bicycle mudguards, inspired by 3 small model ships in the collection of the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge. The first edition of their collaboration launched at the Fitzwilliam Museum, and it's travelled to numerous locations, including Refugee Week at the Biennale Museum in London, the Venice Biennale, Athens, and Lesbos itself. And part of it is now in the British Museum's permanent collection. And it was recently chosen as Object 101 in the British Museum's Radio 4 documentary, History of the World in 100 Objects. So just to introduce Ruth and Issam a little further, Ruth is, of course, an award-winning poet based in London, and she's Professor of Poetry at King's College in London. And she's also a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature. Her most recent publications are Beethoven Variations, Poems on a Life, and We're All From Somewhere Else, which includes a new poem on the Greek island of Lesbos and updates from the years 2012 to 2020, tracing the changing picture of human migration. So hopefully we'll have time to hear more about this collection later. And turning to Issam, Issam was born in Syria and has a background in fine art, architecture, and theatre design. He trained in Damascus, St. Petersburg, and London. And since 1990, he's lived and worked in Cambridge, where he's been artist in residence and a lecturer in art at Christ's College. Since 2011, his artwork has related to the Syrian crisis, reflecting on the suffering of his fellow Syrians and the destruction of cultural heritage. His artwork has featured in several museums around the world, at the Fitzwilliam, the Classical Archaeology Museum, and Kettle's Yard, all in Cambridge, and the Penn Museum in Philadelphia, the British Museum and the V&A, the Brooklyn Museum, and the Venice Biennale. And it's all the more poignant to be hearing from Ruth and Issam this evening, as this conversation takes place just a couple of days after the 10th anniversary of the Syrian uprising in March 2011. And some of you may have seen Issam's drawing performance on Tuesday, which marked the first decade of the ongoing Syrian crisis. So Ruth is going to begin our discussion, followed by Issam, and then we'll have time for discussion and questions. But let me just remind you once again that you're welcome to ask questions and share your thoughts throughout the chat, throughout the talk in the chat box or in the Q&A. And then at the end, you can also raise your hand virtually and ask a question directly. So welcome Ruth and Issam.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much, Claudia, and it's lovely to be here. And you're a very exciting audience to have, because we don't normally, when we do this, we don't normally talk about the process of making it. And since you are all makers, it's a delight to look at it from that point of view. When I went to Lesbos in 2016, I went because I've always been involved in Greece, and Lesbos was now the front line of a terrible war, really. Thank you, Kat. First slide, yeah. Let's wait with that for the moment. And the islanders and the refugees are trapped in a global conflict together. And I didn't understand this. I went to see what was happening, and I was overwhelmed with the villagers. The Mytilene is the capital of Lesbos. The Mytilene photographers, a sort of amateur circle, had taken these photographs. Next slide, please. And you can see Turkey in the distance. It is so close. The interval that they cross in that particular area is so close. And these are the mechanisms by which they are trying to keep safe. Next, please. Next. 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 So let's wait there a moment. So they get to Greece. And when I was in Lesbos, I was so overwhelmed by what I was seeing that I phoned Issam from my Hotel Orpheus. And we'd worked together before, Issam and I, teaching students in Christ's College in Cambridge. And we'd got on very well. And I think I might pause here a second, that I think that some of the things we have in common which made the work go well, though we didn't know it at this point when I was on Lesbos and he was in Cambridge. We are both very, very interested in layers of experience and their physicality, layers of history, and also in images. And I think as a poet, I work very, very much with visual images. In fact, I've got a new novel coming out in July called Daughters of the Labyrinth, which is about Crete, another Greek island. And it is very, very much, it is from a painter's point of view. And so what I love is the way that Issam reacts to language. So his medium and my medium are constantly meeting. I think also the fact that English is a second language, or maybe third for Issam, means that he is constantly interrogating it in weird ways I love. I will say a word and he says, well, what does that mean? And he immediately starts to think in ways that release my mind. So that is a very, very productive kind of thing. But we were just at the beginning of that journey when I made that phone call and said, we must do something. Here are people, Syrians, your countrymen, coming here. They are, and here are the Greeks whom I have worked with and lived with for all my life. And they are trying to help. They are pulling them, waiting for them on the rocks and pulling them out of the sea. Next slide, please. And of course, some of them don't make it. I went with a Farsi guy to this graveyard, and the islanders very, very carefully, all the people who died, there were little teddy bears on the children's graves. There were, they tried to say unknown 15 years old male or female 3 years old and so on. Next slide, please. The ones who did make it were immediately put in this place called Moria. It means mulberry trees. It's a little village outside the main town, but it's a complete accident that it is the caves of Moria in Tolkien. But what did become a hell, it was originally built for 1,500 people. By the time I was there, it was holding 5,000. It was spilling over. And then last year it burned down, and then it was closed by the new Greek government. And it does look like it is a detention camp. They were allowed out. It was a registration place. But for a lot of the young men, that was as far as they got. Next slide, please. There was a family camp, which I also went to. This is Pikpa Family Camp. It's charity run. It was amazing and warm. And it was closed down by the Greek government last year. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, that seems to, are we going backwards? Can we go on? Can we go on to the next slide? Right. Now, of course, there was 500 years of Islamic occupation by the Turks, Ottomans, and the remains of it, of course, are all over Greece. And here there's an abandoned mosque, a derelict mosque, which you're not allowed to go into. Go on, next slide, please. Thank you, Kat. But here are graffiti on it, which says, welcome to Lesbos refugees. Thank you. Next slide. Okay, so a lot of the generation of sort of the adults, like the new woman newspaper editor I talked to in Mytilene, their grandparents had been refugees themselves. from the catastrophe of Smyrna in 1922. Next slide, please. When a lot of Greeks were massacred, and it is sort of absolutely indelible in the picture postcard modern Greek history of the catastrophe of Smyrna in 1922. And you can see all the little boats there. This is a sort of stylized picture of it. And a lot of those little boats came to the nearest place. They came to Lesbos. So as this newspaper editor told me, the stories of the people we pulled out of the water last week are the same stories that my grandmother told. Next slide, please. And here's a graffiti. Of course, there are people who kick back against immigrants. And this says, our grandparents were refugees. Ironismas metanastis, our parents were migrants. And are we to be racist? Next slide, please. In the harbour, there is this extraordinary Statue of Liberty, which, forget America. This one here was put up in the sort of 1920s and designed and cast in Germany, but designed by a Greek. And it's on the shore of Mytilene Harbour. Next slide, please. And this is what it looked like in 215, all the refugees. Next slide, please. And this was art's response, initial response. This is for the Hecatides, the tragedy of Aeschylus called the Suppliants. I just missed the performance, but I took a picture of that, in which women escaping persecution in the East beg for sanctuary in Greece. So I then saw the photographs of the Mytilene local photographers, and it was from that I wrote the poem. And I wrote that after I'd sort of talked to Issam, and I knew he was doing his boats, and we were putting what we both wanted to offer, both groups of people, both the Syrians who had lost their homes and the islanders who were doing their best at that point to open their homes to the refugees. Dark water, burning world. The waves talk to their gods. The waves have their prey. The dead bump sideways in gullies gouged from grey fire. An arm, a trailing bloom, sodden in the surf. Where does the wave end and water around it begin? How do you separate self from the other, edge from the flesh? Shadows of ourselves, no more than a shiver on water, then another life and another, like the waves, and the dead face down, slamming the shore. Last night we waited again, listened to the dark by bales of silver survival blankets donated by foreign charities. Listened to night wind, the sighing of pine tree and tamarisk, slap, slap of water on rock, slap, slap of our hearts. This is where they come, and their stories are stories. My grandmother, small girl, escaping the furnace of Smyrna. This is how it begins, claiming a new place on earth, through waves like rings of a tree, rings of the centuries, blown furrows over this sea that has known so many battles, so many deaths, to the foam and stone of our island's edge. And the families broken. The boy who went ahead to Europe, lost. The father, a forgotten hand whose fingers feel for the dark. Find the lowest star on the horizon, she said to her firstborn, 15 last year. He set out alone. Fix your eyes on that all night and you'll be safe. Her bird soul batters its way to Germany, impossible to penetrate as the emeralds of paradise. Moon after moon has gone by, waiting, forking out more and more money for smugglers, for their excuses, the right time, the right wind, surveillance, no moon, wait a while longer. all for this terror, rocking and spilling on the water alone. Those facing backwards see smudges of rose like fire on the black lace sky. That was our home. Not in our time, Lord. Yes, in our time. And the heart, tapping its prison of bone. The wave rolls over. We feel it thrash through the thin rubber skin of the dinghy, how it hates us and our life jackets bought at blood price. Will this be the wave, this mirror maze of lidded muscle, fluted like the moon? A roaring of smithereen silver, slate-finned like a shark, hour by hour, denser and colder, sliding away to the spire and spine of a breaker to fling us up, spill us down in full view of a long gazed-at shore. Where there was nothing all night, where there was nothing, just grey mist, here is a shape abandoned by Chiron, steering through the small starlight of cell phones, bursting on rocks, grit chipping, lancing the skin, pull them out of the sticks, find the rhythm, wet to the bone, they hug one another and shiver and they cry. Sharp pebbles, whispering trees, our language strange, no doubt, and our hands rough, slippery, pulling them out from the last tug of waves to a sleepy burble of doves. Wet faces in dawn's crumpled blaze, lit for each other, as if water kept its shape after the jug has broken, one shining, petrified moment before the shattered pieces fall away. So now I'll hand over to Issam to help tell his side of the story, the image after the imagery.
Beautifully said, Ruth. Absolutely. If we are usually a lot, where are we? Here it is. Excellent. Now, are you able to see me, hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, excellent, great. Absolutely beautiful, Ruth. And usually I feel that is to follow you is always, I am filled with images, and exactly what you were kindly saying, the way how language speaks to me. And absolutely, I feel honored to work with you, because the way how you think visually in your words. I mean, the last image, I promised myself one day I need to really come back to it and just make something of that image. Such a very powerful thing, that jar taking the shape of the water. I found it's a very memorable shape, very memorable image. So thank you very much. And by the way, English is my third language, and I absolutely love investigating language. Absolutely beautifully said. And I love working with you because you have that curiosity of imagery and making images out of words, sculpting words. I sculpt something else, and I would share with you what I sculpt. And thank you very much, Claudia, and for inviting both of us to work with you and to think together for tonight. What I am going to share with you, the idea actually of looking at migration, it started with me very long time ago. In '95, I visited Cuba, and I went to a beach near Havana, and my friends were showing me these beaches where many Cubans took pieces of furniture, dismantled it, and made boats out of it. And this is '95. I did not study sculpture. I don't know anything about sculpture, but I felt very driven when I came back to Cambridge to really reflect on this experience. So I was studying at that time the Epic of Gilgamesh, and I felt the connection between the two. That is, these pieces of chairs and objects, they become boats. They become alphabet, they become something else. And I really like the idea of transformation from one state to another state. And so this is my first attempt to work with other people's problem, other people's migration. The second one, can we have the next image, please? The second crisis I worked with, it was in 2003, the invasion of Iraq. And again, finding the language, finding the tools to reflect on that, I imagined, and I'm sure that it happened in real life, that many bombs went over Iraqi libraries in Baghdad. And I felt that these libraries, with all the books and pages, went on the air, and I collected these pages, and as if I put them together. So this is a piece called Sound Palimpsest relating to the Iraqi invasion, and it's made out of found material, found paper with X-ray images and fragments of Arabic words, because I'm really interested in this idea of fragmentation of language. So they become drawings rather than only language as such. So this is what happened of me reflecting on other human tragedies. Now it came to my own tragedies of Syria. Can we have the next slide, please? So since the beginning in 2011, I started working with different projects. I am going to share with you just one, the one we are collaborating with Ruth on. It started my usual visit to different museums. I was actually armed with this question, the future of my past. And I was really looking to different collections if I could find objects coming from Syria and what I could do with them. So this beautiful piece, it's tiny, small object. It's almost like a few centimeters. I have it in front of me, but I really don't want to stop just the rhythm of what I'm thinking about. So they were very small, made out of lead, and the silhouette of them created by these three goddesses. I thought there is something there I really don't know, but there is something about this piece I really would like to take it with me and start thinking about it. So what I'm going to share with you now, the process of from that meeting point to the finished product, and see what kind of options I was dealing with, what kind of process I was dealing with. So can we have the next one, please? So then I am going to share with you a few sketches. They are not necessarily beautiful sketches, but they are working. They are drawing becomes form of thinking for me. So this is my memory of that visit. This is what I have seen. I really like the silhouette of these three goddesses. And then I was thinking, what can I do with them? How could I reflect on them? How I could use them? So the next one, please. So I thought, how about actually I make an enormous amount of collection of small boats made out of paper, some of them upright, some of them upside down. I thought, I'm not sure about it. Shall I try it? So I tried a few things. It didn't work. Can we have the next one, please? Now, just out of the blue, I saw an image of a boat, and it's in your right if you see it. I thought that boat with many silhouettes of people, of migrants going, and I thought, there is something really interesting. And it's in the same page. If you look on the left, it's the same boat upside down. And I thought, actually, it will be really nice to create something upright and upside down. And I thought, I'm not sure again. So can we have the next one, please? I thought, actually, I really would like to do a boat and put something inside it. What is this boat will look like? I don't know yet. So this is the sketch where I started thinking how to fold the paper, how to make something out of it. How could I think of, I really wanted to do a massive amount of boats. This was in the back of my mind, but I didn't know how and what material. So the next slide, please. So the first trials were actually on paper. And of course, I was really working with paper. Paper is a very familiar thing to me. So this is one of the first trials, but what to fill them with? If you see actually in this particular slide, there is one on the top left of the image. It's actually made out of passport pages. And I thought, what about actually if the boat's made out of passports? Isn't it something that is the connection between the material and the meaning, the means and the meaning, and the play between the two? But actually, again, the question, what could I fill these boats with? So this is one of the options I did. with filling it with sand. Sand was once upon the time a stone. A stone was once upon the time a piece of architecture, a piece of heritage, a distracted piece of heritage. So I thought there is something really between the material and the meaning. So can we have the next one, please? I was searching for what to fill this boat and what material I'm going to work with this boat. So I visited some previous experiences. This is one of my installations that is traveled to 12 different locations around the world. It is a miniature refugee camps made out of found object, found paper, found medical boxes, and surrounded by burnt matches. The burnt matches reflects the days since the Syrian uprising. And I took it to different places, and each time I burned matches as I go. So burning matches was something it's in the back of my mind. Can we have the next one, please? And again, look at this idea, the burning of the matches becomes a performance in its own right. I am not a performance artist. I am not a photographer. I'm not a poet. I just like to work with things that they speak to me. And this particular actually object, it's really the burning of the matches and the accumulation that becomes making a nest, and the nest is burning. And I found that is really very powerful. The symbol means and what kind of meaning it could generate. Can we have the next one, please? Back to the boat. What material? So the first attempt, and here is the evolution of the making. On the left, it is not necessarily chronological, by the way, but the one on the left is made out of lead. Literally, I thought, how could I make, because the original were made out of lead, and lead as a heavy material. I thought, how about making it out of lead? But I thought actually the message will be too fast. I really wanted something a bit more subtle somehow. The next one was of copper. The third one, when I was looking my bicycle in Cambridge, and I saw the mudguard, the curvature, the color of them, I thought actually there is something really very beautiful about. So the third one from the left is my first trial of the mudguard, but they were not necessarily the boats I really wanted to look like. So the form and the material. So the last one is the one that is the winner. And this was the shape. I am much more confident of the shape, and I'm much more confident of the material. The material has an agency, and the color has an agency, and put them together. So can we have the next slide, please? So here it is. The original inspiration from Tartus, from Syria. And actually there is something wrong, mathematically speaking. This is the 6th anniversary. Our first collaboration, Ruth and I, this is the first time when we exhibited both the antiquity and the contemporary, and the way how they speak to each other, but equally how words speaks to images. So at that time, Ruth came and read her poem for the first time, and that was really a very memorable experience for me. In an afternoon, in a sunny, that it looks like really ages ago when we used to do this kind of things, in a sunny day in the museum, and we had this beautiful afternoon where Ruth read her poem. Can we have the next one, please? And since we did not stop, I did not stop, and we didn't stop taking these pieces to different places. Some of them, Ruth couldn't make it. For this one, for example, this was a very powerful installation for, this is the 7th anniversary in King's College Chapel, where I spread about 1,000 of them on the ground of the chapel. And again, the space, the context, and the object, again, totally different meaning. Can we have the next one? We had this, another very beautiful location in Aldeburgh, in the Lookout Gallery, where you could see the sea, in a place where you are waiting for the boats to arrive. In this location, in this place, the boats are waiting for the waves. And I found that kind of communication, it really speaks to me, coming from theater design background, the way how the relationship between the space and the object. Can we have the next one, please? And totally different environment, totally different place. This is in a very beautiful exhibition called Living with Gods at the British Museum, where the Lampedusa cross and the Lost, actually the one on the left, it's another collaboration with Ruth, where she showed me these very, very heartbreaking pictures of children arriving to Lesbos dead, and they have nothing on their gravestones except their toys, except their clothes, except their, a plague saying unknown. And I was really moved by this. So this is another collaboration called Lost, and my boat. And now on this note, actually, the cross and the boats are going to travel for the next 2 years. I'm working with the British Museum to travel with these two pieces for 6 museums for the next 2 years. And I'm really looking forward to it. Can we have the next slide, please? So again, we went, Ruth and I, to the Venice Biennale, and we had the installation, we have the reading, but while we are having the installation, while we were there, I took my boats around the city, and every day I installed them in different locations and just left them for the day and take a picture of them. So the daily routine of taking them around the city was really, and the city being surrounded by water, it spoke volumes. Can we have the next one, please? And this is the last slide. I left it exactly as I received it from the BBC, because it was a very delightful surprise when Neil MacGregor chose my object as Object 101. And I was listening to the program absolutely not knowing. I knew it's going to be mentioned, but I didn't know that it will be given this title, which is, in many ways, it is a huge honor, but equally it is a huge responsibility. I did not set out to make a historic piece. I made a piece that is in reflection to what I have heard, what I have seen, and what I worked with Ruth about. And now it is actually, it is there where the material, it's speaking volume. And I really like the idea that these humble materials could speak to many different people around the world, reflects many tragedies of migrations with the humble material. So this is my slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Issam. Thank you, Ruth. Incredibly moving from both of you, and really fascinating too to dwell so much on the process of making and those initial drawings. It was really wonderful to see those, and you're sort of thinking through material and the relationship between material and meaning. And I mean, it's so troubling, isn't it, to be revisiting this work in the context of the ongoing crisis. So I was reflecting myself on, going to see your installation at King's Chapel. I think it was 2018, which I found really moving, and seeing those vulnerable yet in some ways hopeful forms of the boats, Issam, with the sort of charred matchsticks and the way in which they felt almost like a kind of timeless votive sort of offering, in the flickering candlelight. And so I'm really interested in both, I suppose, thinking about scale and time a bit more, and also in relation to your titles, but just a larger question about commemoration and honouring, really. Wondering whether you feel this collaboration is about the ritual of remembering, but also a sort of call to action. I think, Ruth, you've written about poetry having a responsibility to look hard at the world, I suppose, and just wondering about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, when I first rang Issam, I didn't really know whether it was. I thought of it as sort of celebrating and honouring the experiences and efforts of both parties, both people, sets of people. But I think I can't speak for Issam, but I think that our feelings about this have changed a lot as we went to different places. When we went to Athens, for instance, we took it to Athens, and a lot of people there had already been working with Syrian refugees in camps in Greece, and they were I felt that they were rather interested to know that we were going the next day to Lesbos. And of course, when we got there, I realized why. Because how did these people who are working with this tragedy every day, and there is no escape from it, how do they really want art made about their experiences? And perhaps then we went last year to the island of Mull in Scotland, because I had discovered that there were about 24 families of Syrians who had been sent there.
I was Butte.
Oh, it was Butte, sorry, Butte, yes. And I persuaded Issam to come with me, which was very nice of him. And we went, and we wanted to offer both the people of Mull and of Butte and the children of Butte and the organizers of helping the refugees and also the Syrians there, something, whether workshops or something else, but they didn't have very many resources. And I think the Syrians themselves, so you can speak much better, they didn't really know what we wanted to offer, or why should anybody make art out of their experience. And I think we both felt we needed to consider that a lot, because I felt, I mean, I wrote this book, We're All From Somewhere Else, and that was how I first met Issam. I mean, in fact, in the original book, and in this one now, there's a poem about your Cuba installation. And so that went into the book. And so I've been thinking about migration, but I was really only have been thinking about the journey, and that's dangerous enough. But there's another journey immediately afterwards, which is the journey that lasts a lifetime of integrating into the other society. And I do not know how you can make poems about that or art about that, which speaks to the people who are, it's just a very, very complicated problem. And I'd love to hear other people's thoughts about it. What about you, Issam? What did you feel?
I actually feel really, I think that is one of the things I really try very much, almost to whatever I am making, I really need to put it outside to see how people respond to it. But I have a hidden agenda somewhere that is, particularly now with the news about Syria, it's just now because of the 10th anniversary, there is quite a lot about Syria. But actually, if you look back a little bit, Syria is actually fading away from the news. And I feel that somehow our responsibility, any creative responsibility, is still to flag out, look, there is a problem. It is our problem, so our function somehow to flag the problem, not to find the solution, because it's not our job to find the solution, but to flag the problem because many people are hiding it. And this is where I feel actually that collaboration, my voice in its own will have one weight, your voice in its own have another weight, but together to put this very humble object, very powerful words for people to hear, because how easy to hide this crisis, but it's not going anywhere. The crisis is still there, and the crisis is still ongoing. So the idea for me, it is definitely reflecting on the tragedies, but equally I wanted the people who are witnessing these tragedies not to be silenced. My reflection.
Yes, I mean the poetry as witness is from my neck of the woods. Yeah, the witness. So it started out in celebration, and I suppose an offering.
Mm.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So, sorry, Claudia, you wanted to say something.
No, that's certainly how it moves, the way in which it moved me as an offering, and certainly in that context of the chapel, there was something very, very moving about that conjunction. So I was interested in your interactions with the different spaces your installation has inhabited, and how those spaces might have been changed by your installation, on a more permanent basis, even when it's moved on. I was thinking particularly of the British Museum and, your work. I think you showed a slide from the work, I think it was Lost, where it was shown amongst some of the ancient objects and in the context of the Middle Eastern galleries.
Can I just say something on that, actually? It's really very beautiful you are touching on this, because I am really interested in the relationship of the space and the object. Mm-hmm. And if you remember that magnificent architecture of King's College Chapel, just the minute you come in, immediately you are invited to look upwards and light, but suddenly you are actually your eyes bombarded with this insignificant object, tiny small ones on the floor, and the relationship between the magnificent and the insignificant. And I found that dynamics speaks to me very loudly. And of course, it's like anything else. The space contributes by contradictions or otherwise to the object. And of course, I remember actually taking them to one of the events Ruth and I went to, and actually I asked everybody to hold the boot, and actually holding it in your hands, like very much my experience going to the British Museum, going to the Prints and Drawings Library, and holding sketchbooks and seeing the sketchbook, seeing the artwork in the sketchbook, totally different perception of seeing them on the wall, seeing the process of thinking, the drawing as a form of thinking. Totally different experience. So it's definitely, we are made out of all of these connections of the spaces and the material and the chemistry between them.
Thank you. Yes, yes. There's definitely that invitation to touch and that sort of intimacy, I think. Yeah, I wanted. There are quite a few questions coming up in the chat box, but I just wanted, Ruth, we were sort of talking or touching on voices there, and just thinking about, you know, these sort of the way in which you went about gathering these fragments of different people's stories and weaving them together. You know, both the refugees, the islanders, but also the stories of sort of from a more mythical past, the sort of deeper past and mythical past. You know, you talk about their stories, our stories, this sort of collective story making, and how you retain, I suppose, the individual story within this larger story. You know, that sort of going back, I suppose, to that image, that terrible image of the woman washed up on the beach, and this sort of erosion of identity. And I think that connects with, there's a question that someone's raised in the chat around the sort of, in the spirit of participatory and inclusive research, asking about whether you talk to people personally and
yeah, yes, yeah. I did. I mean, I went into camps. I got I couldn't get into Moria. A friend of mine had got into Moria by working with a Spanish NGO, but I did get into Karatepe, which was also run by the Mytilenean local council, and they showed me around. And I wasn't allowed to talk to refugees there, but I did talk to refugees in the street, because once they left Moria, they could go and walk in the street. Then I went down to 2 other camps, the one I showed you, and also one that was then being run in a hotel, an empty hotel. And I talked to a woman there from Syria. Oh, I mean, I couldn't get all the stories in. There was one, I talked to one woman whose children were in Germany, and she was going to join them. And I was told at that place about another woman who was just so depressed, and there had been a German volunteer there, and she said, both my children are lost, and she had photographs of them. And the German girl said, well, when I go back to Germany, I will try and find them. And she did. She found a boy and a girl. They were in 2 different German cities, and they had both gone mute from the trauma. And she showed them the picture of their mother, and they started to talk. And eventually that woman was reunited with her children, all from the wonderfulness of the atmosphere in the camp, and this particular German girl who just went and found them and did it. And you know, it was so sort of moving, and that was why I mean, actually, some of the men looked so like Issam. That was partly why I rang you up, Issam. It was because, you know, it just I felt I am speaking to Issam's countryman, and I need to speak to him.
And here he is speaking to you, and I'm really delighted that you did that phone call. I mean, what a difference made that phone call. I mean, really great that we ignite our previous collaboration. And if I may say something very similar experience, when we went to Lesbos, I went the day you left, Ruth, I went to the Moria, and that was, I mean, I am really, this piece I did before visiting Moria, but when I visited Moria and I saw in many ways, the resourcefulness of a human nature and the way how people really try to make home out of anything. But one scene really, I mean, I broke down just seeing this scene that a young Syrian lady was paralyzed, and she had her wheelchair. The wheelchair itself is broken. And I found, I mean, that, and her father was looking after her, who was absolutely washed, his body washed with shrapnels. And just that scene, I just could not take it at all. I really left crying, and I just felt, how could I represent, how could I take this tragedy and make something out of it? And of course, having that distance, now I am able to reflect on it. And actually, there is a piece that is I am hoping to show in my solo exhibition here in Cambridge at Kettle's Yard and Heon Gallery in 2023, where you could see actually I am working on this disability, the question of being totally reduced, not only as an identity, but the body is reduced to very little little movement. And I found that is the restriction. They don't have the language, they don't have the place where they stay. I mean, there was something really very tragic, but equally having this particular refugee camp recently being burnt out, I just found that is, I mean, how else one could cope with. I mean, imagine being in these flimsy places, trying to make something out of it, and suddenly this very little disappeared again. So I feel my job as an artist is just to carry on reminding the world there is so many tragedies in the world that is we need to listen to.
Aristotle in the Poetics talks about catharsis of a tragedy coming from a mixture of you feeling fear and pity. And I realized when I worked on tragedy for 20 years that you feel fear, you feel pity because you pity these people, but you feel fear because they are human and you are human too. And that's the basis of empathy. And it seems to me that I think that's also one thing that Issam and I both have in common. I think that's the place from which we make art.
Beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. Just, yeah, that it made me think, Issam, about, you know, as you were speaking about sort of limitation, and I was just thinking of sensory deprivation, and just wondered if you might say a few words about your drawing performance, you know, and the relationship. I know we've talked about this before of blindfolding, or the blindness and touch, and that was something I think we were talking about last year in person, but
Absolutely.
how it informed your, the drawing performance, which was so physical.
It is actually, it's really interesting. That is, I feel I am still living that experience, although it was only half an hour, but it's such a very powerful experience because of the limitation, what we are going through. In the Howard Theatre at Downing College, I had this very beautiful theater with beautiful piece of paper, and I was really performing. I don't want to spoil it to others, but the essence of it, that actually I was blindfolded, making words, fragments of words in Arabic, without any dots, without any, if you like, if you read Arabic, you need some time to see what I was reading, what I was writing. And the transformation of the material, I started with charcoal and ended up with ash. And what is happening between, I would leave everybody to watch the performance, because it's not, you cannot transfer that experience in words. And especially there is a very powerful piece of sound and singing that is, you really need to hear it, you really need to see it. And then you will see that kind of journey from one material to another material to another material. And the last thing I would like to say on that, actually, I found that is the production, the ash that is I produced after this, in itself, it's not a finished product. It is a starting product for something else. I am going to take that ash and I'm going to exhibit it in a sacred place in memory of many Syrians that is, sadly, they are not with us anymore. But equally, I'm going to make a brick out of it for the memory of future generations who are going to remake Syria, but from the ash. So this is what was my last drawing performance, and I really urge everybody to see it.
Yes, I will put a link to that in the both the Q&A and chat box so that you can all find that. But that's so fascinating to think about the sort of geological time, the sort of earth time that's contained in your materials. But I'm just aware that there are lots of questions following on from the last part of the discussion. And actually Elizabeth Fowden is asking, you probably met last year at Kamal Balata's exhibition. Yeah, she's thanking you both for the talk and wanted to ask you some about repetition and replication in your work, thinking of the boats and now the idols, and in relation to your Aleppo soap installation.
The way actually to answer this, I found myself that it's all started when I did my Another Day Lost and the repetition of this refugee camps and the way how putting things near each other, they started to really, it's almost like many voices coming together. But I found equally the way how it's like pointillism. Pointillism, a point in its own color speaks that much, but putting it next door to another color, to another dot, it's the accumulation of voices. I found that it becomes a performance of different voices coming together. But equally, there is another layer to this, because I'm really interested in numbers. I find numbers such a very powerful thing, and particularly counting years. So all to do with this count of years. So the one in the Fitzwilliam Museum with the soap, it's 366. It's three my Aleppo soap sculptures, and there is a three idols from the museum. So it's three leap years. So it's to do, again, the numbers should have a reflection of some sort. The repetition of burning the matches, again, to do with the days. So I found that the repetition becomes almost a sound performance. When I am performing my burning matches, it's not the same rhythm, it's not the same voice. Each match has its own meaning, but together it's like an opera, like a chorus when they are singing together. I think that is, but of course it depends where they are singing and what they are singing. So this is part of my interest in the repetition.
Thank you. Ruth, I just wondered, just thinking about the sort of longer histories that we were discussing, and thinking about in your collection, we're all from somewhere else, the way that you're moving between poetry and prose, and between the sort of human story of migration and animal migration. And I just wondered if you might like to tell us a little bit more about that. And
yeah, I mean, it started with the animals, and I wanted to use the animal. It starts with the animals, and I wanted to use the animals as a sort of to show the dangers and the struggle, so that by the time I got to the humans, that was established. So I spent 3 years on bird migration, really, which is fascinating. And when I did the essays, the little essays that go between blocks of it, they're sort of meditations on what migration means, always in the end for human beings, but it's using the animals because it's part of a spectrum. I mean, and I realized that, people migrate for so many different reasons, but usually they come down to two. Either there's something you want to get away from, or there's something you want to go towards, what I call the push and the pull. And often it's persecution and war, like the tragedy of Syria. Or else often it's a better, you get more insects if you're a bird, and you get better life if you go to America rather than stay in famine-ridden Ireland, for example. So Ellis Island became an important place for me because everybody went through there at various points, and they brought all their materiality of their culture with them, quite extraordinary ways. And that all went into the fabric of the United States, whatever Trump said. And it's what the migration made the world. Migration makes the world physically. The first, however life started here, It started with something coming either from outer space or from the underwater, and it spread. That was the cell, and the cell gradually spread, and that is how life spreads across the globe, and that's exactly how humans civilization spread across the globe too. So I wanted to put it into a context, a sort of that was my hidden agenda, like Issam's really, of saying migration fortifies and creates the world we live in. It is not an alien thing, it is a natural thing. It weaves the world together.
Thank you.
I have actually something just spark. The idea of migrating in the form of sleeping from one state to another state when we sleep. It just brought something to my mind. My son, when he was very little, he wrote, I usually write after him what he is saying, but he said something like, I don't remember exactly, but he said, when I dream, I open my eyes to see my dreams. And I found that is such a very powerful thing. That is actually, I tried to copy him, and I am struggling with insomnia, and I cannot see my dream. But I just wanted to say that is the way how the restriction sometimes it is the place where you travel with your mind, where you travel with your dreams. And I just think of many Syrian children or any nation's children when they are deprived. The only thing is actually migrating in their mind to somewhere else. This is their rescue. This is somewhere the mind becomes a very powerful tool. The dream becomes a very powerful tool. And I found that migration is physically you are in one place, but the mind is migrating somewhere else.
That's what at the end of my book, that's the migration I have. It's the sort of mental migration or spiritual migration, also the idea of the metempsychosis of the soul. But also every artist is no stranger to migration. You migrate, and your imagination itself is a kind of like the Wizard of Oz. You know, you end up you leap from black and white to color, and it's so beautifully done in the film of the Music of Oz. That film, Somewhere Over the Rainbow, it's an octave leap. You know, Salman Rushdie talks about somewhere over the rainbow. So that somewhere already takes you into another world.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
We see what we collaborate.
I'm aware there's lots of questions coming up. Benedict, I know you're hoping to ask a direct question, so you can unmute yourself. Hello.
We cannot hear you, Benedict.
Can't hear you yet. Is he?
Come on, we need to encourage him.
We can't hear you, I'm afraid.
Benedict.
He is unmuted. I don't know if his mic is working.
Maybe your mic's not working. Well, maybe you can write it in the chat if you can't.
Okay.
Let me see. Sorry, there's so many different screens to look at. Sylvie also wanted to ask a direct question. Do you want to unmute yourself if you're able to? You just need to unmute yourself now. Maybe it's a problem with our end, Kat. I don't know if you're able to.
While we are waiting, Ruth, can you carry on singing, please?
Yeah, please.
Well, I could also, yeah. How are we doing?
It could be a problem on our end. I'm asking Sylvie to unmute, but it doesn't seem to be working, I'm afraid.
Well, both Benedict.
Okay, I'm unmuting myself.
No, we can hear.
Yes.
Yeah.
I thought it was fascinating. And I was wondering, you were wondering about art, and I've often thought about that, you know, And journalists have the same problem. You know, they report the news, and yet it's harrowing news. And are they intruding? And do the people want to be depicted? But as you said, it's being a witness. So I think it brings a richness to the world, and it proves that, you know, these people have souls, and, you know, they have lives. And I love the bit about migration makes the world. I think that's lovely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very interesting that you say journalist, because that was one of the things that we came up against in Butte, because these Syrians had a lot of journalists coming. They'd been there for 2 or 3 years, and journalists had come from all over the world, and come from Glasgow, come from Edinburgh, and they wanted their piece. They wanted the same pictures of the baker or the whatever it was, the barber, and then they went away again. And the people hoped at first that they would get something from it, but they got nothing from it. They only got the same thing every time. They didn't get helped. They couldn't leave Butte. There was some complicated things about, they were dying really to get off the island. They came from Syria. They were in a camp in Lebanon for a long while. Then they were told they were going to Scotland. They were from the suburbs of Damascus. They had never seen the sea. They had no idea of life outside a capital city. And in November, they arrived on a small Scottish island. And the islanders were very, very, very welcoming, and they gave them each a hot water bottle, which of course they'd never seen and didn't know what to do with, but they jolly well needed. But then they were stuck there, and the journalists came and went and got their story, but it didn't benefit them. And so when we arrived, what were we doing differently, as far as they were concerned, from journalists? We wanted to make something ourselves. We also wanted to give to them, but they didn't really have they weren't in the place that could have helped them, I think. I don't know. What do you feel, Issam, about that? The difference between us and journalists?
I think that's definitely, if you remember, that is because I speak with them in Arabic, that was really totally different bridge.
That was wonderful. Actually, we came upon the barber first in the back streets of this little town in Summer Butte. And suddenly we could have been in downtown Damascus, and they gave us sort of cookies and things. And you were speaking Arabic. I was so moved.
I mean, imagine being in that place and they are offering us their hospitality. And I just found that is really very moving, the way how, particularly I was really very moved by the way how they spoke about the locals, and the way how the locals actually gave them this kind of welcoming place, but equally they gave them security. I remember speaking to one of them saying, actually, we all coming with this trauma of the war and the sound of fear in our everyday life, but to come to a place where we don't lock our cars or lock our doors. I found that they found it so amusing that is people don't lock their doors there, and how hospitable the locals. But equally, exactly what Ruth is touching on, they didn't want to tell their stories for us to take it and just make something out of it, and they will not actually be, they are just like a research material, and they didn't want to be that research material. I really didn't want to. I wanted to tell them, look, I don't have anything but just coming to see, just to hear. It's almost like it was for me to hear the words from the original, not from the journalist, not from anybody else, not from the media, but actually from the original source. I really wanted to hear. Was the attraction for me, to hear their stories. And it was very moving stories to hear them in Arabic. It was such a very believable story. And of course, I know that is the word island. We have one island in Syria, and I doubt that they have visited it. But to arrive to an island, it's almost like to be cut away from life somehow. It's for them, life is in a big place, in a big cities. But I know equally that many journalists went there and they made a very beautiful reports, but they didn't necessarily make difference to their life. Their life wants action somehow. And particularly having that boat coming and going, I remember them watching that boat. It's almost like the boat becomes another form of, it is a metaphor. It, of course, the word boat is a metaphor, but actually it becomes another place of hope. What kind of news will come to them? So I know there is something happened with Sylvia's screen. Anyway, I feel that is actually, particularly some of them were ill and they really needed some medical attention. And of course, in the island, there is some small center, but of course, many of them had to be transported by helicopter to be attention in a bigger hospitals, because they are coming with really quite serious illnesses, witnessing the chemical attacks and many things that they left their bodies actually in a very bad state.
In one of them, one man you talked to in that barbershop, he'd been gassed and he had something with his lungs, and he'd been given a sort of fourth floor flat, and it was taking months. And we also went and talked to the rehabilitation officer, and you know, the bureaucracy of it, so hard for everybody. Everybody was trying to do their best, but it was taking months for him. He couldn't always go down the stairs to take his daughter to school.
And if on this note, actually, I really applaud the Scottish government on taking such an action to help the Syrian refugees. And I know that it is really, I know that is in Europe, I feel for the Greek, that is, they have offered great help. But of course, these are small places offering help for this magnitude of a problem. And I wish that is all European countries did not necessarily close their doors to many refugees. And this is, I know that that it could be done. It's together we could make something.
Thank you both. I just wondered if we can get for a last question, because I know Benedict was trying to speak there, and it was something I wanted to think about further too, was, you know, we've talked quite a bit about the relationship between words and images and your collaboration, and he's wondering about, he's thinking about how many artists have been inspired by poetry, and if you, I mean, you have described the process to some extent, but do you find it easy to collaborate, someone who paints in words and someone who paints in images? You know, you've talked about visual thinking, and there's such a visual, sort of compelling visual element to your poetry, of course, Ruth. Just maybe a bit more about the process of how you exchange between the two different media.
Well, in a way, it wasn't. I mean, neither of us want to be illustrative of the other. So we were each going off on our own our own train of making, really. And you know, by the time I got to Issam, he already had seen the little lead Phoenician boats, and he was, you know, but he showed me, you know, the mud, and he'd already got to the mudguards. And I was thinking, you know, I put together fragments of things that come actually from my whole training and life as a classicist, because that sea are the rings of the centuries. I mean, that sea is the sea between, well, it's the sea between Troy and Greece. It's the sea between the East and the West. And there have been so many, just in 1/5 century, there have been so many battles and disasters there and deaths. And so a lot of it came out of my own things. And I think that's an important thing about collaboration. You can offer each other ideas and then you work at it yourself. At least that's I think that's our experience, isn't it?
Absolutely. And if you remember, Ruth, I remember we were visiting the British Museum, and then after that we went to have a drink. And I mean, it's really that kind of it's almost like a playing ping pong. That is the way how I throw something and Ruth throws something, and this kind of exchange, and such the fertility of, I mean, I must say that is, of course, you being a poet and a classicist and many other thousand things, and the singer we just witnessed, it gives this kind of whatever subject we could speak about, there is so much to speak about in terms of.
I think that word "speak" is really important. You said in your presentation something like that, things that speak to me.
Yeah.
And I think that's the really, really important thing, is things that speak in a human voice from the world as it is now, this appalling world which we're living in. That's why I put that passage in the poem about "not in our time, Lord." Yes, in our time. You know, this is the times that we've got to be up to our times. And it is how things speak to you. And so going back to your question about collaboration, a lot of the ping pong and the back and forth comes in the conception, in the beginning of it. And then we work on our own art, and then we share it. So sometimes we have done something and somebody will ask a question like, how is it a collaboration? And Ruth's written a poem and he's done these things. How is it a collaboration? He didn't get it.
Agree. Absolutely. And so we have now stacks of seeds, needs to grow. And we have that amount of seeds now to grow. And it's really, I'm really looking forward to sing for these seeds and water them for them to grow.
Yeah. Oh, well, lovely. Oh, that's a sort of hopeful note to end on, which is always welcome. And I think your collection, Ruth, ends with that idea that the force driving migration is hope. I don't know whether that's something we can conclude with that thought, but I just wanted to say to everyone who's sort of written thoughts and thanks in the chat and the Q&A, I will pass these on to Ruth and Issam afterwards, because some of them I think are from friends and many people who over the years have been really moved by your work and appreciated it. So I'll make sure that those get to.
Yes, definitely we need. I am dyslexic. I cannot read like this.
So much. We've got the 2 columns with many comments and thanks. So once again, from me and from the Drawing School, we want to thank you both for sharing this really fascinating and incredibly moving discussion and story. Thank you. And thanks to everyone
for holding this, and particularly very meaningful for me 2 days after the Syrian anniversary uprising, 10th anniversary. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And it's always a pleasure to hear Ruth's poem and her thoughts. So I look forward to a better time when we could actually all physically sit and talk to each other with a little drink.
Yes.
Okay, great.
We look forward to it.
Thank you.
Thank you.